When you think about your local water utility, you probably picture reservoirs, massive pipes, maybe some large purification tanks. But today, let's dive right into our explainer by peeling back the layers of your local water infrastructure to reveal the massive, almost entirely invisible energy engine that's actually driving the whole shebang. We're going to look at the exact standards investors use to judge if a water utility is truly prepared for the future, relying specifically on the SASB standards for water utilities and services.
So, it starts with a simple question, but it has a surprisingly complex answer. How much energy does your tap water actually use? Every time you turn on the faucet, you're not just using water. You're basically turning on a power plant. To put that into perspective, water is incredibly heavy. We're talking over 8 pounds for just a single gallon. Moving millions of gallons of that weight across an entire city requires massive, massive force. The flow of your water is entirely dependent on the flow of electricity, and the financial implications of that dependency, they are absolutely staggering. In fact, after basic inputs like purchased water, chemicals, and labor, energy use is typically the second largest operating cost for a water utility. Think about that for a second. Of all the massive concrete and steel infrastructure costs involved in managing a city's water supply, paying the local power bill sits right there at the top of the ledger. Managing that energy efficiently isn't just about saving the utilities some money, it directly dictates the rates you pay on your monthly water bill. The sheer scale of this power drain makes total sense when you track the journey of water through its 4 highly intensive life cycle stages. First up, utilities must physically withdraw the water, often pumping it from deep underground aquifers. Next comes conveyance, literally forcing thousands of cubic meters over miles of rough terrain. Third, it hits the treatment plant, running through these incredibly energy-hungry filtration and purification processes. And finally, distribution relies on massive, pressurized networks to push that water all the way up to your shower head. Every single step of this requires heavy machinery running 24/7.
Now, here's where it gets a bit ironic. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a harsh reality. As climate change affects water availability, a utility's energy intensity is practically guaranteed to go up. As traditional freshwater resources dry up, utilities are increasingly forced to turn to alternative treatments. Things like desalinating ocean water or recycling advanced wastewater demand substantially more energy than conventional treatment. Put simply, the scarcer the water gets, the more power it takes to deliver it to you. To really grasp the environmental impact of all this power consumption, we have to talk about Scope 2 emissions. You can think of this as a utility's inherited carbon. Because a water utility consumes so much electricity, its carbon footprint is inextricably linked to how the local power grid actually generates that electricity. If a utility relies on a grid that burns coal or natural gas, well, the utility inherits those emissions. Their environmental footprint isn't just the physical waste they manage, it's the smoke from the power plant down the road.
So the crucial point here is that relying strictly on the traditional power grid exposes utilities to massive vulnerabilities on 3 major fronts. First, it generates those high Scope 2 emissions we just talked about. Second, as environmental regulations force the broader power sector to clean up its act, electricity prices are inevitably going to spike, and those are costs passed directly to the water utility. And third, it's pure reliability. Climate change is already pushing aging power grids to their absolute limits. If a severe storm knocks out the grid, the pumps stop. And if the pumps stop, the water stops flowing.
So, how do forward-thinking utilities break free from this high-cost, high-emission trap? Well, they integrate renewables and on-site generation. Utilities are having to make strategic, aggressive decisions about energy efficiency and generating their own electricity. Shifting away from pure grid reliance towards solar, wind, or biogas doesn't just lower their carbon footprint, it acts as a massive insurance policy. It insulates the utility from unpredictable grid failures and those volatile price spikes.
Of course, every utility out there claims to be going green these days, but how do we actually verify that? To measure and manage this critical transition, investors and stakeholders turn to the ISSB's SASB standards. Think of this as the ultimate scorecard for tracking utility performance. The SASB framework provides rigorous, industry-specific metrics that allow stakeholders to see exactly how well a water utility is managing its energy risks. It cuts right through the PR spin and the marketing jargon, getting us straight to the raw data.
Under the SASB standards, this falls specifically under the energy management topic, utilizing a precise metric code, IFWU 130A.1, to quantify energy consumption.
By standardizing the reporting into gigajoules and percentages, analysts can do something incredibly powerful. They can take a utility in a remote, water-stressed desert and directly compare its operational resilience to a utility in a water-rich valley, placing them on an absolutely level playing field.
Let's break down how this builds a complete scorecard by dividing a utility's total energy footprint into 3 distinct, highly measurable components. First up, the utility must disclose its absolute total energy consumed in aggregate gigajoules. So that captures everything from purchased electricity to fuel burned right there on site. Second, they have to report the exact percentage of that energy pulled from the traditional grid. And third, they need to show the percentage derived directly from renewable sources.
Visualizing this data is a real game changer because a utility's risk exposure becomes instantly clear. If 99% of a utility's energy mix is standard grid electricity, investors immediately know that entity is basically a sitting duck for localized blackouts and rate hikes. But if that renewable energy slice is steadily growing year over year, it proves to stakeholders that the utility is proactively future-proofing its primary operating costs while successfully slashing its climate impact.
Now, you might be wondering, what's stopping a utility from just slapping up a few solar panels and declaring themselves 100% green? Well, to prevent greenwashing, the standard strictly defines what actually counts as renewable energy. It has to come from naturally replenished sources like solar, wind, or geothermal. But here is the critical accounting catch. If a utility generates renewable energy, they absolutely must retain the actual renewable energy certificates, the RECs. If they sell those certificates off to another company looking for a tax break, the utility can no longer claim the environmental benefit. You literally can't double dip on saving the planet. The standard ensures the math is absolute.
I want to leave you with this final thought to consider about the invisible engine powering your community. We've seen today that the cost, safety, and reliability of your tap water is entirely dependent on how successfully utilities manage their massive energy demands. As resources get tighter and the aging grid becomes more unpredictable, you have to ask, is your local water utility adapting to resilient renewable energy sources, or are they still tethered to the vulnerabilities of the past? It's a critical question for the future of our infrastructure, and now you know exactly which metrics hold the answer.